Well, hello, and thank you for having me here on this beautiful Berlin summer day. You did steal me from the good old days of Istanbul, but that's fine. Let me start with a show of hands. How many of you in the audience believe that the elections in Germany are completely rigged? Show of hands. See, almost zero. That number, maybe one right there. I'm going to take your number and social security number just to pass it on. That number was 72% in Turkey. So 72% of my population believe that the elections were rigged, which means even the winners thought they were winning by rigging the elections. That's why we founded Vote and Beyond, right? And this is from a real summer day in Istanbul, where we had the open microphone session, which then grew to 150,000 members and the biggest grassroots movement of modern Turkish history. Now, when I will look back at the days of Vote and Beyond, all the excitement and all the joy that we've had, there's one sentence that sticks out. It's timing beats speed and precision beats power. It also happens to hang over the dojo what I train at, right? I think there's a very strong analogy between this sentence and the social movements of today that are fighting, that are resisting the growing rise of populist authoritarianism. So what I would like to do with you today, what I'd like to explore with you today is how we can Muhammad Ali ourselves out of this discrepancy. Some people argue that the loud alarm bells about populist authoritarianism around the world are a bit exaggerated. Yet when I look at this, from religious conservatism to socialist extremism, from North America to the Middle East, from sub-Saharan Africa to the very heart of the EU, there's a very clear trend that populist authoritarian ideologies are gaining ground. Now, some battles are won, and some battles are lost, but the trend there is visible. There are very complex reasons behind this, and there are people from academia here that would explain a lot better than me, so I'm not going to go into the details because of the risk of oversimplifying and misinterpreting some of them. But from first-hand experience, I can say that if and when authoritarian regimes come to power, it leads to an inescapable erosion of indispensable values and human rights, most of which we take for granted. Like we as individuals who cherish the human dignity and human integrity, we wake up to every day with freedom of expression, secularism, a right to a fair trial, a free and functioning media. All these pillars of liberal democracies, we take them for granted. We don't have to work for them. Now, when authoritarians are in power, through their professional mechanisms of communication and through all the resources they dedicate to this, what they do is they first make these pillars of liberal democracy optional and then completely trivial. So what I claim and what I wholeheartedly believe is that social movements of our age are the most effective, if not the only tool that we have to resist this trend and perhaps one day to revert it. Why do I believe that? There are three main reasons, really. The first one is a fallacy. I used to believe that institutions are there, or were there, and would stand their ground, right? Somehow checks and balances would prevail, the Supreme Court would step in and stop the abuses against academia and against opposition movements. I would believe that international associations or the international community would come in and stop the detainment or arrests of opposition journalists. I would believe that my armed forces or an intelligence agency, they would stay the course and not all of a sudden start acting against the laws and the regulations that they were sworn to uphold just because the government changed, right? But make no mistake, a political will that is strong enough and sustainable, and authoritarianism certainly doesn't lack that, can erode some of the most established institutions in the society over the course of a single generation. Supreme Court decisions can be circumvented through declaring martial law. International calls can be dismissed by various political labeling. And, very peaceful resistance movement, grassroots movement can be dispersed violently at times because the armed forces aren't necessarily working in a legal framework anymore. Now, what we need to do at this stage is really acknowledge that institutions are as strong as the will of the people. And if they're not supported, they can only fight the fight for us for so long. Second reason why I believe social movements are the only way to go. We have expectations from the opposition parties, right? Especially in the face of the threat of authoritarianism, we expect them to get their acts together and create a viable political alternative. A problem cannot be solved by the same parties that created it. Opposition parties, in most cases, are as responsible, as guilty in the rise of authoritarian regimes as the regime itself, right? That may be through apathy, that may be through incapability, but expecting them to solve this issue is like expecting international agribusiness companies to solve the threat of deforestation. They're not going to be the solution, they're not going to be the answer that we're looking for. And finally, a bit on the good news side, with technology intervening in our lives, or like we using technology a lot better, we communicate a lot better and we collaborate a lot better across the borders. And social movements are uniquely positioned to make the best out of the cross-border communication. Some battles are won and some battles are lost. But all over the world, there are social movements who are experiencing the resistance against the rise of political authoritarianism. You know, we can learn from the good experiences, we can learn from the bad experiences, but at the end of the day, we reach a collective experience, collective conscience that you can say, which gives us the tools to fight the fight in the best way possible. And that's why I think the social movements will really be the strongest tool that we have in the fight over the next couple of years. Now, how do we ensure they are successful? How do we ensure that social movements really leave this battle winning? That's when we go back to the boxing again, right? Timing is really of essence. I realize that we're all at different stages of this threat, right? Some of us are already suffocating, others are not feeling it yet, and hopefully never will. Some have felt it in the past and really lived through it and are seeing it today. So I acknowledge that we're at different stages. But timing really is everything. When we were at the peak of Vote and Beyond, 150,000 people mobilized in a fairly good organizational structure. 2/3 of them were young, predominantly college-educated, and these were the people who actually stepped out of their doors. So Maraike, as you were said, they went through the first step of getting out of their doors to take the risk and to really do something. So we had a community, we had a movement that could create real impact. It is very disappointing when you're at that moment and you realize that the judiciary in the country is completely compromised through political appointments, that the education system has evolved in a way that is leading to creating the next youth of unquestioning people, because evolution has been thrown out of the roof and the religious scripts have been sort of stuck in. It sucks that the free media infrastructure has completely been destroyed, either through detaining or arresting opposition journalists, or through various media connections that they have at the business level. I'm not saying it's too late when we don't act early, but just makes the job a lot more difficult. We can't afford to be the boiling frog in the pot. It's very easy. The water is getting warm and we get relaxed and we can't stop thinking, you know, it's not going to get as bad, it's not going to touch us. But what we need to do is not wait to try to jump out of the pot until the water is already boiling. At the first sight of things, the first moment that we hear someone turn on the oven, that's the time to move. And that's the time to move decisively. Timing, good timing, is the best weapon that we have in the space to fight against the authoritarian, against the speed of the authoritarian regimes that are coming at us. Precision beats power. When we started Vote and Beyond, the political parties and the government agencies were the strong incumbents, right? They had millions of members, they had massive budgets, and they were dominating the infrastructure, basically. But 150,000 people rallied with us. Why did they do that? And why did they not go to the political parties? I think it was because we were very precise in terms of what we wanted to achieve. We didn't take the system head on. We didn't pretend that we were going to solve everything that was wrong with the elections in Turkey. But we said, on election day, we have a very precise target of making sure that independent people who are educated in electoral law will be there and will solve that one issue. Going against the system in the first is wasteful and risky, and if you can actually get the people to believe that you can be the solution for a part of the situation, then that creates a story that people can buy into, that also creates a consensus, and it's easier to create a consensus around this by the majority of the people. Now imagine this. Every single person in this hall owning one topic, one social issue. It can be something macro, right? It can be the integration of refugees into the society. It can be improving the educational standards in the rural area, especially for girls. Or it can be something micro, something as small as lack of sports facilities in your neighborhood, lack of indigenous cuisine in your neighborhood. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how many people you get around it. But as long as we get caring and capable people around this issue, think about the exponential impact of these collectives of network. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that one day we'll come together and centrally manage the system to create the Uber organization of the world. That's never going to happen. It's not realistic, and it's not necessary either. But collectively and separately, these networks of caring and capable people will cover the entire social base, so that one day, if authoritarianism may transpass, we will have already infrastructures, we will already have the networks that we can use to stay our ground and to move. Now there's a third bit that is key to the success of social movements that doesn't necessarily coincide with my boxing reference, but bear with me. It's the way we think about and the way we define leadership in the new age. It used to be the case that the leaders had more access to the information, they were better connected, they gave more time to this, and they simply gathered a lot more information, they synthesized it better, right? So what we expected from them primarily was direction setting for the organization. Just tell us which way to go and we'll follow. The situation has changed. The society as a collective now has more access to the information, and thanks to the technology, the society as a collective now can synthesize this information better and actually do the target setting a lot better than a single leader or a group of leaders. Think about it as neurons, right? So the leaders were somehow centrally placed in the brain before. Maybe they were even larger neurons. But we as the society are the brain now and don't necessarily need that one cool neuron to do these things for us. What does that mean for the role of the leader for social movements or in general in our society? I think there are really three things that the new age leadership needs to think about and needs to prioritize. The first one being, the role of the leader is to keep the community together, especially the core of the community together. Even in a massive organization like Vote and Beyond, where we had 150,000 people across 46 provinces, we had 30 to 40 people in the core of the network, assuming various roles such as legal, field organization, communication, and so on and so forth. These 30 and 40 people, they dedicate a good chunk of their lives to the organization. But we're all human beings, right? Fights break, hearts are broken, ideas clash, everybody wants to go their own way. So it's onto the leadership to keep them together through various methods. Different things work with different people, but primarily, we need to convince the group that there's something larger in what we're doing than our individual opinions or individual feelings. The second thing that the leader needs to do is to ensure participation beyond our natural reflexes. It was mentioned several times in the previous speeches as well. The biggest fallacy of our age is that we tend to group with the people that are in our immediate surroundings, right? It could be physical, it could be social, it could be economic, but our natural reflex, and the natural reflex of any social movement, is that it brings together people that are alike. What the leadership needs to do is to ensure that in the ideal scenario, that people from different views and different perspectives, but if people are not coming, at least their perspectives are reflected in this movement so that finally the outcome is sustainable and is representative of the society. That's one of the primary goals and primary responsibilities of the leader. Finally, a bit on the boring end, somebody needs to be ensuring the delivery and the deadlines, right? There's a really nice saying, a camel is a horse drawn by a committee. It's wonderful to sit around the table and to discuss things for hours to arrive at that one perfect solution. But there will be times when we need to move. There will be times when no decision is worse than any decision. It's really onto the leadership to enforce those deadlines and make sure that the community moves. Now, we've talked through a lot of things today, but there's one overarching thought that I would like to leave you with. It was Alija Izetbegovic, the first president of Bosnia-Herzegovina, who said, in the end, what matters, what we will remember, is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. ever since I heard that sentence, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. I get the chills of being that silent friend. So my call on you is, the moment you spot something, the moment you realize that there's something off, that you feel strongly about, don't risk being that silent friend. Start moving. It's time to move now. Doesn't have to be large. It can be anything, large or small, but start moving, because I promise you, if you stay the course, if you keep moving, you won't walk alone. And if your heart puts you on a path that's close to the things that we've talked about today, you will certainly create impact beyond your imagination in preserving the values of liberal democracies, and we desperately need it today. Thank you very much for listening.